welcome to the Double Blind Magic Hour, where we cover what's going on in the world of psychedelics, from insider baseball drama within the rapidly unfolding movement to the latest news on research, politics, and beyond. For those of you who don't know me, I'm co-founder of Double Blind, a print magazine covering psychedelics, and today we're joined by an incredible journalist and someone who we're lucky to have as an advisor to Double Blind, Shayla Love. She's a journalist who, yes, has reported on psychedelics, of course, that's why she's on this podcast, but also she writes about so many other things, including psychology, neuroscience, philosophy, which is one of the reasons I'm excited to talk to her today, because she brings her reporting from the world of mental health and wellness more broadly into her perspectives on psychedelics, which I think is really unique. So hi, Shayla. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me, Shelby. It's great to be here.
This episode is brought to you by Magnesium Breakthrough by Bioptimizers. Magnesium Breakthrough by Bioptimizers is the only full-spectrum magnesium supplement with 7 unique forms of magnesium that your body can actually use and absorb. And yes, you need all 7 forms if you want to sleep better, feel more relaxed, have healthier levels of blood sugar and blood pressure, lower inflammation, have strong muscles and bones, balanced hormones, and dozens of other benefits. Visit bioptimizers.com/doubleblind now and use promo code DOUBLEBLIND for 10% off any order. So I always like to start these conversations by asking journalists how they came to report on psychedelics, because I think that it's really unique and there aren't that many of us. Like, there aren't that many journalists, actually, and there aren't that many people working in psychedelics. So finding people at the intersection of the two, like, I don't know, there's maybe 50 of us in the world, at least, who are writing, I think, for Vice and places like that, and are writing in English. So what was your path? How did you get here?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you're right, there aren't that many people who, and I wouldn't even consider myself, as you said, like a totally psychedelic drugs only focused journalist. It has taken up a lot of my work, which I feel really happy about and grateful for. Now that Vice is gone, there's probably going to be a lot less psychedelic journalism, at least like everyday kind of iterative psychedelic blogging, which is a bummer. We can talk about that later, maybe. Double Blind is really the last psychedelic focused publication left, which I think is really, really sad. But I started out doing kind of like local news reporting in my early days, but pretty quickly pivoted to science and health journalism. I got my master's in that from Columbia. And that interest came from both coming from a family of scientists growing up and like everyone around me being really interested and working in those fields. But then I was really interested in mental health because of my own personal experiences struggling with obsessive compulsive disorder, and then seeing a lot of my friends struggling with depression and anxiety, and just really wanting to like get into this world of what makes the mind tick and why our experiences are the way they are. And so that led me on a path to writing almost exclusively about like neuroscience, psychology, mental health. I really loved writers like Oliver Sacks, who's a neurologist, who would write about these case studies of people having kind of extreme experiences because of problems that they have in their brain, but revealing just like how funky day-to-day experience can get depending on what's going on in your mind. And so when all of the research on psychedelics started coming out, it was a natural fit for my beats that existed already, but I didn't have like a pre-existing interest necessarily in writing about drugs. It was really more their effect on the mind and mental health that got to me. And so I was at Vice, which was the perfect home to have those interests. And so I just started writing about psychedelics a lot. And this was in like 2017 or so, when things were really kind of blowing up in the mainstream media and psychedelic journalism. You could write about psychedelics all the time and it would reach the attention of people who weren't just using them kind of recreationally. So that's how I got started writing about them.
And I hope you don't mind me asking, but your path is really unique because a lot of psychedelic journalists actually get into psychedelic journalism because they are journalists and they're also using psychedelics and they're very passionate about them. So when you started writing about psychedelics, did you have a personal relationship with them at all?
I didn't really. I mean, I agree with you. It is a little bit unique. I was so interested in hearing about people's experiences on them. I had taken psychedelics before recreationally, but I hadn't really I didn't not like them, but I didn't really develop a very close relationship in the way that I see other people have with them. It just wasn't something that happened for me. So when I started writing about the research and seeing people apply it therapeutically, I think that made it more intriguing for me actually, because I was like, oh yeah, that like thing that I did or that I tried this one time or that, like these different substances, people are really having these profound interactions with. And I'm curious about that. And I want to know what's going on with the research in the brain. And it it's hard for people to have a totally neutral experience with psychedelics because sometimes they really really love them, or sometimes if you have a negative experience, or one that really was like difficult for you to process or integrate later, you can be really wary and like cautious. I really fall somewhere in the middle, or at least I definitely did when I was starting to report on psychedelics, where I had like some really good experiences and some kind of whatever ones that weren't like that amazing, but also weren't that bad either. And so I came to it sort of neutrally.
Which is in a strength in some ways, I think, if we want to believe in the gold standard principle of objectivity within journalism, which is the whole other conversation. We do know, obviously, that journalists are people. And, as much as we try and uphold these values of sort of neutrality and interviewing both sides, inevitably, if a person has had a profound transformative experience on psychedelics, that is going to color the way that they write about them. And there's this whole ethical debate within the psychedelic movement right now about if someone is holding space for someone who's on a psychedelic, should they have a personal relationship with psychedelics? But we're not talking about if someone is writing about psychedelics, should they or should they not have a personal relationship with these substances? And how does that change the questions that they're asking and how they're framing their stories?
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting question. And something that's happened to me, which I find really interesting, is that sometimes if I write a story that's maybe like bringing up potential problems about psychedelic therapy, or, it's like, I wouldn't even use the word critical, but it's just like not overwhelmingly positive. Sometimes I will get criticisms or emails where people accuse me of never having taken a psychedelic because the piece is not positive. And I think that's a really interesting thing to couple those things together, because I'm like, I actually have, but it's not really, it's sort of like besides the point. But the fact that you think that I haven't because this piece is critical is a bit revealing of that. I think for me, because my experiences were kind of neutral, it was very easy for me to both talk to people who had more negative experiences or more complicated experiences, and people who had those really profound transformations, and have both be completely both like plausible and imaginable to me how it could go in either of those directions, because I was kind of, my personal experience had been middle of the road. Like it was not difficult for me to like kind of endorse either way.
Right. Yeah, you're getting at something so interesting. We had Mary Carey on a few episodes ago, and she was talking about this story that she reported for us for the print magazine on the relationship between conspiracy theories, right-wing extremism, and psychedelic experience, and how there's this whole contingent of people who believe in the pandemic and believe that, on and on about, we're not going to get into the whole story, but on and on about all the conspiracy theories, UFOs, and George Floyd's death being a conspiracy, and it gets pretty dark. But when we posted about it on our Instagram, same thing. So many people in the comments were like, well, clearly you've never done a psychedelic, which Mary, I don't want to speak for her, but from what I've gathered, she's not like you where she's had some psychedelic experiences and the net outcome is that she feels neutral about these medicines. Like she's had a lot of psychedelic experiences that have been positive and transformative and informed her identity. And so it opens up something that we're hopefully going to get into later in the episode when we talk about some of your reporting on sort of the romanticization of what psychedelics can do and how that potentially might actually harm the movement in the long term, because we're not being critical about what the research actually says.
Totally. Yeah, I really resonate with that. And it just makes me think like someone who has really positive experiences, there could be a world in which they are more critical, actually. Like they're more critical about things like commercialization or patents or, like the way these decriminalization or legalization programs are happening because they care more. Like I, again, feel like my experiences like with psychedelics are kind of middle of the road. But what I care a lot about is accessibility to like potentially really promising mental health care treatments. That's like the basis of the reason I keep writing about psychedelics is because I care so much about that thing. And that's also where my critical eye comes from, because I don't want mistakes to be repeated that I've seen in the mental health space before as a mental health reporter for many years before writing about psychedelics.
And that is the perfect transition to our first segment where we're going to get into some of the very sticky and complicated reporting that you've done on the world of patents, specifically psychedelic patents. But first, we're going to take a quick break. This episode of the Double Blind Magic Hour is sponsored by Fungi. Fungi chocolates and fruit chews are an alcohol and psychedelic alternative activated with Kanna. They're perfect for the newly sober or for people that are interested in trying a psychedelic adjacent plant. At Double Blind, we're very passionate about the fact that there's a lot of romanticization of these bigger psychedelics, these scheduled substances, whether it's MDMA, psilocybin, LSD, but there's actually a whole apothecary of legal plants and fungi that come from the earth that are beautiful for connecting with yourself, connecting with other people. I've tried Fungi's chocolates. I did them the other day in the backyard with my friend. It was just the kind of gentle stimulant and euphoria that I was looking for. In addition to the Kanna, the Fungi chocolates have cordyceps, aphrodisiacs such as Damiana, and a gentle stimulant to activate the experience, which is called guarana. The Fungi fruit chews are dosed at half of a chocolate serving, giving you more flexibility in how you build your dosage. So strength-wise, 2 of their fruit chews equals 1 chocolate triangle. I had 1 chocolate triangle the other day. With Kanna, they're able to provide a sort of similar instant magical effect to psychedelics. You can kind of think of it like a microdose of MDMA. Kanna also pairs well with other substances such as mushrooms, cannabis, caffeine. If you want to check out Fungi's Kanna chocolates, then you can get 25% off of your first order. Just use the code DoubleBlindPod at fungi.com. That's FUNGUY, I can spell, .com. Thanks for listening. First up, I want to talk about your reporting on psychedelic patents. And for those of you tuning in, before you're like, snooze, patents, I don't want to listen to them talk about patents. I just want to say that while the world of patents is pretty hard to understand, and I can attest to that as someone who has also tried to do some reporting on patents, albeit not even remotely to the degree that Shayla has, it's actually really interesting, and it is important as it relates to psychedelics, because as Shayla was referencing, there's a lot of concern right now in the psychedelic industry, movement, field, people have different words for it, about accessibility. That there's a lot of people who are obviously suffering. People say we're in a mental health, quote, epidemic, and we need novel solutions, and psychedelics might be that novel solution, but what happens if they get to market and people can't afford them? Or people don't have a particular diagnosis that the substance has been approved for, right? Like mushrooms are being studied, psilocybin, for major depressive disorder and treatment-resistant depression. So if someone has alcohol dependence or general anxiety disorder, or one of the many, many other conditions for which psilocybin has shown promise in smaller clinical trials, will they be able to access this treatment for any amount of money that is reasonable for most humans right now? So that's really where this whole conversation around patents comes in. Shayla, can you just give us a little bit more sort of high-level context as to why we should even be talking about this?
Yeah. And I can explain a little how I started writing about patents, which I didn't really write that much about even as a health reporter before this. It all started with, as many things do, a tweet that I saw from Graham Pachenik, who is a patent lawyer who I didn't know at the time. And he tweeted a patent application from Compass Pathways that was about, the methods in which they might deliver their their psilocybin, their synthetic psilocybin, which is called polymorph A. And in the claims of the patent, it described some of the basics of psychedelic assisted therapy, like holding someone's hand or having soft furniture. And those details were included in the claim. And his tweet was basically like, if this patent got granted, would they be able to, sue someone for patent infringement who delivered the same kind of psychedelic therapy? These things are very basic. Like along with their synthetic form of psilocybin, could they sue someone for doing these things?
Right.
Like holding
soft
someone's
furniture.
Hand?
Yeah. You patent having soft furniture? I don't know about that one.
Yeah. And so, we'll get into, so that application was never granted, right? So this was an application. But when I saw that and I saw that tweet, I sort of woke up to the fact that psychedelic patents were like going to be a thing. And when I looked it up, there was at the time, the only like patent tracker that was out there was on Psychedelic Alpha, which is a website run by Josh Hardman. And I saw this, like, they had these graphs of like how many patents were being filed every year, and the number was skyrocketing. That made a ton of sense because there were all these new biotech companies starting up, people trying to get investor money, and that's the way that you get investor money to do research to develop these molecules. Is you say like, look, I own this thing. That means that we're going to make money afterwards. So why don't you give me money and I'll make it, and then I'll give you your money back. It's like that's how the cycle works. But I knew from reporting on other health issues in pharmaceuticals that the way the patent system works in this country is kind of messed up. Like people are supposed to only have a patent for 20 years, but sometimes that it doesn't work out that way. They make a small change. They hold on to a patent for a really long time. It's one of the reasons that drug prices are so high in the United States. And psychotherapy prices for separate reasons are also really, really high because there's often out of network. And I just thought like, wow, like patents are really going to be a thing because we're not just talking about psychotherapy. We're really talking about like a biotech model where people are developing novel molecules, or, molecules that are similar to ones that we know already to get into this investment structure. And so that first piece that I wrote about that patent was basically using that patent application to ask a question like, what is it going to mean for the future of psychedelic assisted therapy when there are all of these things that are owned by various companies? And what is it going to mean for cost down the line? I still think we don't know the answer to that question because we don't actually have an FDA approved therapy yet, right? Like all of this is still in the future. And since I started writing about this, I mean, the number of patents, we don't even really pay attention to it anymore. I used to report on like, here's a new patent. I would never write about anything else again if I did that now, because there are just like thousands of patents on almost everything. And, I think this is the way that money is generated, but we still don't know the implications of that. And I still think it's an important question to ask and for people to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's my understanding that I know you're not a patent expert, so if you don't know this one, that's fine. But it's my understanding that there are different kinds of patents and three different kinds of patents that might be relevant to psychedelics, which I think is interesting for people to understand is, one, there's the novel compound, right? Like I have created a drug that has never existed before, which we can talk about, the degree to which some pharmaceutical companies are trying to tweak compounds and then say, okay, it's novel. No, it's not novel. It pretty much is psilocybin, but you just made a little change so that you could patent it. Then there's the application of the drug, right? Like, is it possible I think it's possible to patent a compound that's already in the public domain, but for a particular indication. So like psilocybin is in the public domain, but you're studying it for anorexia. No one's ever done that before. Just pulling something out of a hat. You're nodding, so I'm assuming this is correct. And then my understanding is there's also the delivery system too. So like, for example, psilocybin's in the public domain, but you know what's not in the public domain? A psilocybin nasal spray.
Well, exactly. And this is one of the ways both that like people can genuinely innovate and also ways that people can just like claim ownership to things that they didn't really invent, right? So like maybe a couple examples will be The DMT vape pen is a good one from I think a couple years ago. Some person has a patent now for the DMT vape pen and said like, "Hey, I invented this thing." Yeah, and it's like I think this is brand new. I made this. The patent application office obviously they like search PubMed to look for prior art, which is like examples that it's been done before. They didn't find a DMT vape pen. Even though everyone
why aren't
knows
they need to search Arrowwood. Someone needs to turn the patent office onto Arrowwood.
I agree. I mean, this is what Porto Sofia has been trying to do. They've been trying to send prior art that might be in unusual places to the patent office, and they've been really successful, but they're just a small nonprofit. They can't do everything. So that, that's a great case of like, is that really novel? It's not about being anti-patent. It's about being anti-bad patent and like people getting patents for things that aren't true innovations and sort of hijacking the system of being able to get like investor dollars from inventing something that's not really a novel or like it just like it's not something new. That said, so another example is like MindMed applied for a patent to give people an SSRI and psilocybin assisted therapy like in conjunction, which was also a controversial patent because that's not really new either. And like they did get it. They did get it. And it's, again, it is a complicated patent and it's hard to understand the exact ownership and the boundaries of ownership unless you really dig into each individual patent, which is why it's so tricky. And one of the reasons that I wanted to report on this topic and cover some of these like patent basics is that I felt like all of this patent law stuff was a language that people didn't have access to, or like just like information that they didn't have access to. It's tough. Like it's like hundreds of pages. You have to pay patent lawyers thousands of dollars in order, like no one knows how to read these things except for them. There's real barriers to people being able to assess like, is this a patent that I think is cool, or is this one that I think is not okay and like I feel not great about it? I think it's like even really difficult to do that process. So that said, if we invented like a psilocybin pimple patch or something, it's like you stick it on your face and it gets rid of your pimple and it gives you.
That's like what Sephora is going to have in 7 to 10 years alongside the CBD face masks. You got your psilocybin pimple patch.
Yes, psilocybin pimple patch. If we invented that method of delivery and it was brand new, I would be like, let's if we made it, like we can patent that. That's okay. That's a real novel invention. I don't know. Maybe someone's done that before. I shouldn't say anything. But that's what I mean. Like, but you're right. There are true innovations that exist within all of those categories. There's also kind of ways to skirt the boundaries. And again, the implications are sort of down the road. It all depends. A bad patent on itself doesn't really mean anything. But it does give the person a right to sue somebody later, potentially, or decide to like make someone else's life really difficult if they decide to sue them or like threaten for legal, like a legal battle that somebody else can't afford. It also, if you are like starting a company, let's say I want to start a company in the psychedelic medicine space, I might look and see who else has a patent for the thing that I'm interested in. And if they have one, I might not pursue that idea or topic because I don't want to be sued later for patent infringement. That's a way that like patents can actually stop innovation. Because let's say that other person has a patent just for no reason, or like they're just kind of sitting on it. They're kind of a patent troll. Like they just did the patent. They don't intend to do the work. They're just going to sue people and try to make money that way. You're actually stopping something from being researched. So one of the examples that we saw, me and my editors, like we had gone through and looked for a bunch of them. Someone patented LSD for food allergies. And we tried to reach out to the guy. It wasn't anyone in the psychedelic space. It was just someone who patented this thing. And it's possible that somebody who wants to actually research that or start a company wouldn't do it because they see someone else already has the patent for that. And so they're kind of like, well, I don't want to touch that. Like, let me do something else. And so there's all these secret like rules that are driving decisions and research dollars and innovation. Again, patents aren't bad, but it is like something that I think is really important because it drives a lot of decision making.
So interesting. Patent trolls. Did you make up that word? It's like domain trolls.
Oh, no.
People that just buy like websites left and right and then they just sit on them. Actually, funnily enough, I've never shared this before, but I originally tried to buy doubleblind.com. I was in my parents' bedroom or my childhood bedroom in my parents' house, and Yeah, couldn't figure out. It was owned by people. We tried to reach out through GoDaddy and no luck. So doubleblindmag.com, folks.
There it is. Yeah. Well, so yeah, I did not come up with patent troll. Patent trolls are really interesting to read about. And this is a strategy and a type of company or person that exists in the pharma space and in the tech space for a really, really, really long time. And to say that there aren't going to be patent trolls in psychedelics is just like naive. Like there definitely are going to be. It's a tried and true practice that makes people money. And I think we're going to start seeing it more. Again, this is not really my idea. This is just kind of what happens as the field narrows and companies start to go out of business, because there's so many little startup companies, the only assets that they'll have left, it's already happening. The only assets they'll have left will be their IP. And so what are they going to do with it? Like they hold on to it. Like that's like what kind of where trolls emerge from, is sometimes from like companies that didn't make it, but they still have their IP. And so all they can do maybe to like make up their revenue or something like that is like sue other people based on the IP that they have. And then the worst kind of patent trolls are basically shell companies that only create IP, never intend to do anything with it, and then just go after people who like seemingly are going to infringe on their patents.
That is so crazy. So I want to just zoom in a little bit and talk more specifically about Compass, because that's kind of where this whole conversation began. Was you wrote a story about Compass Pathways and their attempts to patent various things related to psilocybin therapy. But a lot of folks who are listening might not really know all of the hubbub around Compass, because, I mean, talk about insider baseball drama. I remember first hearing about Compass. I mean, it was like they had just gone from being a nonprofit entity to a for-profit company. And people at that time within the psychedelic space, I want to say that was like might have been like 2019, something like that. 2018, could have been 2018.
Yeah.
But people at that time within the psychedelic industry were like, oh, the first big bad wolf of psychedelic pharma has arrived. Like this company, they were nonprofit, now they're for profit. And a lot of kind of longtime therapists within the field who had been a part of Compass when they were a nonprofit and had sort of given them a lot of information about best practices regarding psychedelic therapy and how you prepare people and navigating the experience and integration and all of this languaging, felt like they had really sort of been gutted for their expertise and then left to the wayside. And it took a couple of years for, I think, people that are not really within psychedelics, but interested about the dynamics within psychedelics to start paying attention as well and talking about like this narrative of Compass as the big bad wolf. So can you just talk to us a little bit more about, some of basically the fiery debate around Compass and whether it is or is not an ethical company?
Yeah. I mean, it's, I wrote a piece called, "Is it possible to have an ethical psychedelic company?" And the answer was kind of like, is there any ethical company? Like when profit is your motive, there are things that happen and you can sort of be happy or sad about them. But I think Compass, here's the deal with Compass. The nonprofit to for-profit transition is really important in their story because people got their feelings hurt during that process. And it started them off on a bad foot, frankly, with people that were in the psychedelic community. As you said, there are people who like volunteered a lot of their time and energy with the idea that they were participating in something that would become a nonprofit, like MAPS or like USONA, like that was sort of the world that they were in, which was the idea that we're going to research this and develop it, but it's going to be nonprofit. And that really matched everybody's like values who was giving their time. So when they transitioned to a for-profit, and Olivia Goldhill is the one who wrote about this, I think, when she was still at Vox is where the piece was, I believe. It was before she was at STAT. People were really upset about it. And then they started doing things that all for-profit biotech companies do, which is that they started filing patents on stuff. They started using the money from the patents to fund their clinical trials, which are very expensive. And so it's not necessarily that what they did is unethical. I think what they did was common practice with every other kind of biotech or pharma company that exists in the world. But because in the psychedelic community, people thought we're going to do biotech differently, that was the wake-up call. Like, oh, just because this is a psychedelic company doesn't mean it's not a pharmaceutical company, doesn't mean that they're not going to have to file patents to fund their research, which is fine, but also maybe they will file patents that are on the boundary of what we think is a good patent or not, just like other pharma companies do. So I think that's the reason why Compass is important. It was the first big company, but it was the first big company that signaled to everybody else that, like, hey, psychedelic biotech is not going to be different from regular biotech. It is going to be exactly the same, and it's going to have a lot of the same problems. It may also have it may come with some of the perks. It may be able to generate millions of dollars of investment. That's what other biotech companies do. And that's something that psychedelics had never done before in the traditional pharma space. So, but those two things go together. So I think that's why the story of Compass is really interesting and why I focused on them so much, because they were the big first one. They represented this ideological shift, or kind of like a, coming of age moment for the psychedelic industry. And the challenging of their patent, the polymorph patent by Carrie Turnbull and Freedom to Operate, was a really good just window into how the patent system works and what happens when people don't like a patent, how expensive it is to challenge it. They ultimately lost that patent challenge. And, it really elucidated what that whole process is like. And I should also say that story was also important because Carrie Turnbull, even being so against Compass's patent, he has patents himself with his own companies for psilocybin, for OCD. And it's really hard to say like somebody's ethical, somebody's not ethical, because people are just operating within a system, I think, which allows behavior that's on the border of like skirting the law.
Right. And that's why I think it's so important that we're having these conversations, because we do see a lot of people just trying to create almost this false dichotomy in the psychedelic space between the good guys and the bad guys. But that's just getting increasingly harder to uphold, especially as MAPS, which, was the longest time nonprofit in the space, has now established a for-profit arm and rebranded. So I just want to say, for folks who don't know, Compass went public in 2020. I checked it out last week, and they currently have a market cap of around $600 million. Carrie Turnbull, he's one of these names that, again, like, if you're not in the psychedelic industry, you probably haven't heard of Carrie Turnbull, but there's a lot of these sort of kind of, I was going to say men and women. It's mostly men, but men and women behind the curtain of the psychedelic industry, like these people who are very well capitalized, who have been sort of working hand in hand with researchers and other folks in the field for, oftentimes more than a decade. And you haven't heard their names, but like, that doesn't mean they haven't had incredible amount of influence on how the psychedelic movement has unfolded. Carrie Turnbull is one of them. As Shayla mentioned, he, along with others, decided to challenge Compass's attempt to patent their version of synthetic psilocybin. And in that application, he had a quote that I actually thought was really interesting that I wrote down. He said, "There are an almost infinite number of novel contributions to be made to the future of psychedelic science. That there is a molecule named psilocybin and that it can be useful in treating depression is not one of them." You put that in your story. It's so good.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And, again, I think like this question of what is novel? What should the patent office consider to be novel? What are the boundaries for novelty? This is a question that has been argued about in the patent world for a long time. Like, put psychedelics to the side. When I was doing this reporting, I was interviewing people who have been arguing and fighting for patent reform for decades. And I was like, we are having these issues where like people are able to get patents on things that we don't think are novel. And they're like, welcome, join the club. Like this, we have been fighting this for decades. They're like, I can't believe you are just learning about this right now. And, there are people like, it was actually so amazing. And I started talking to patent experts, patent reform advocates who they don't know anything about psychedelics at all. And they were some of my best sources for reporting on all of these stories, because they have been, in the muck of this for a really, really long time. And it's such a good example of how psychedelic journalism like has to look beyond itself. Like, as I said, the people who had the most expertise on this they didn't know what psilocybin was. I'm like, oh, it's mushrooms. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. Like they didn't know that, but they could talk to you for a long time about how that boundary for novelty has changed in America over time, and how other countries don't allow for polymorph patents, but the United States does. You know what I mean? Like there are all of these really interesting nuances in how psychedelic medicine is going to unfold that just like exist in experts in other fields.
Oh my gosh, I could just talk to you about this. There's so much more to say about Compass and all the drama around Compass and some of their investors, including Peter Thiel and German billionaire Christian Angermayer, and some of the fights Christian Angermayer has gotten into with Tim Ferriss on Twitter, now X, never going to call it X. So
never going to call it X.
There's some juicy stuff here. For those of you who really want to get into what exactly Compass tried to do and successfully managed to do in terms of their patent and polymorph patents, Shayla does an amazing job breaking down what a polymorph is in her story in Vice. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes. Right now, we're going to take a quick break. For those of you who don't know, Double Blind began as a print magazine 5 years ago that I had the idea for when I was meditating. It hasn't been easy. We've been up against a lot, from censorship to all the challenges of running a media startup in the 21st century. We vowed to never have a paywall over our articles and to always offer scholarships for our educational offerings so people are not locked out from the information that they need to heal. This has all been made possible by the support of our members. Our membership comes with journeys to help people prepare for and process their psychedelic experiences, and we've teamed up with our favorite people in the psychedelic space to offer breathwork, cannabis ceremonies, integration circles, and more. Plus, the membership comes with a free subscription to our print magazine, which comes out twice a year. So if you feel called, I invite you to join us. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about some of your reporting on the psychedelic hype, so to speak. And I actually think that there is a sort of organic transition here from our last conversation around patents, because there's a lot of hype in the psychedelic industry, right, among people who want to get in and people who want to invest. And there's also a lot of hype among researchers, and there's also a lot of hype among individual people who want to have psychedelic experiences. Like there's just hype all around, and it's affecting how people are investing in the space, potentially too aggressively. It's affecting how researchers are talking about psychedelics. And I'm especially interested in talking to you about this because, you know, as mentioned, you've reported on so many other facets of sort of the mental health industry more broadly. And I'm curious to hear, like, in your reporting on other novel mental health treatments that are coming about, like, how does that put into perspective for you the degree to which people are saying, like, we need a novel solution and psychedelics are it?
Yeah, I think this is where my fatigue comes from, or like my wariness about hyping something up so much comes from writing about other novel miracle solutions to the mental health epidemic, right? You hear this, it just like over and over and over again, from natural supplements to things like transcranial magnetic stimulation to the promise that we're going to have like really personalized individual psychiatry based on biomarkers. Even like back to SSRIs, all of the debate about them. Are they placebo? Do they work? Are they harmful? Like all of that sort of stuff. It's just become clear to me from writing about mental health for a long time that there will never be a single intervention that works for every single person. Mental health is incredibly complicated. Even the boundaries of what a diagnosis is being hotly contested in like the mainstream psychiatric world. Like, is a mental disorder really a brain disorder? Is it something else? Does it come from the environment? Does it come from your genes? Is it in your body? Is it trauma? Like, people are threatening to throw out the entire DSM one day and then also like recodifying it the next day. It's just like, it's so complicated. So when you read an article that's like, oh, the cure for depression, I'm like, it's not. It's definitely not. Like, I would love if that was the case. But having a little nuance in how we talk about mental health treatments is just more accurate. And it's a really messy landscape and industry. And for a person who's really struggling with their mental health, to hear that there's a cure and be disappointed over and over and over and over again, I think causes a lot of harm. and it makes people just get their hopes up and then feel hopeless again. And so when I think about like a journalist role is communicating to the public, I always think like, what if this is a person for whom this intervention won't work and they read this article? You can still talk about the research and the potential promise, but I think about the use of anecdotes a lot and how so many kind of just like shorter mainstream pieces about psychedelics just give that really good, fast anecdote. Like this person was super depressed, nothing else worked for them. Then they took mushrooms, now they're fine. A lot of those stories are even more complicated than they appeared in the news. And it's just like, if we think about communicating about psychedelics to people who are not enthusiasts coming to this from a place of distress, like there's just we need to be more responsible in like communicating how variable it can be.
Yeah, I love that you brought up all these other treatments that you've reported on that are not related to psychedelics, for which people are really excited. What I mean, can you just talk to me a little bit more about what your experience has been like talking to folks who are really excited about the promise of treatments that are not psychedelics? Like, what parallels do you see? And do you feel like psychedelics is showing more promise than some of these other things? Or our perception of the promise is skewed because we're just all personally really attached to the idea of legalization?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated. Like there are ways in which psychedelics as a mental health intervention seem to be more promising because you don't have to take them all the time. I like that there's a therapeutic component. They seem to, really help people come to these massive insights paired with psychotherapy that they just weren't able to reach on their own. The studies in general are still really small, like they capture something really important that's happening. But at the same time, I just still think we have a lot more to learn. But so to answer your question, I remember when all of the work was coming out about transcranial magnetic stimulation. And I went to conferences where people said, this is going to be the future and everybody's going to do this. And this is going to be the thing that's paired with psychotherapy that'll be really easy. And everyone will just, be cured of depression. And it is a really interesting, useful thing that I know some people have done, that a lot of people have gotten help from. Some people try it and it doesn't work very well. It's kind of hard to access and like it can be really expensive. Therapy doesn't necessarily, or like insurance doesn't necessarily cover it. Some people do it with therapy, some people do it without. So it's kind of a good example of like these adjunctive therapies are difficult to break into the mainstream. And that's something where you don't even need really intense psychotherapeutic support. And like the potential side effects or adverse effects are not that profound. But I still heard people get really, really excited about this, both in my personal life and in reporting, and then just kind of not have it really work and then feel really bummed. And then sometimes they had gone off their SSRI in order to do it. There's a lot of parallels. People make decisions, really important decisions about their medication and their personal life and what's going to happen to them based on what they think will finally help them. And when it doesn't work, they get really depressed, even more depressed.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. I think I said at our panel, panel I was moderating at Psychedelic Science that you were on, the sexy headline is a veteran has PTSD, goes to the Amazon, does ayahuasca. This is too long of a headline, so don't hire me as your editor. But, and, their life is transformed and everything is better. What's not a sexy headline is lots of people do mushrooms. Some people are helped by them. Most people still have problems, which is probably the most accurate way I could, you can have a transformative experience and simultaneously still struggle a lot in your life. And I can say personally that I've had transformative psychedelic experiences, but I still sometimes struggle with sadness. I still sometimes struggle with my inner critic, all these things that are just, they're a part of the human psyche, right? Like, what are we all trying to achieve? We're all trying to be perfectly happy, perfectly healthy, and perfectly whole on a planet that is like degrading before our eyes. Sorry, I'm getting off my soapbox now, but like, there's something there in this like idea that people just want to be perfectly happy and perfectly whole and perfectly healthy. Like, is that even the human condition?
Yeah. And I think that something really interesting I've been thinking about is how it's been very striking to me that when people in the psychedelics world talk about things like PTSD or depression or anxiety and using psychedelics for these things, there is a lack of kind of critical thinking around the boundaries of the conditions in a way, as I mentioned before, that is happening in other areas of psychiatry. Like the thing in psychiatry right now is asking, what is depression? What is a pathological amount of sadness? And what is just an adaptive response to terrible conditions? How much of these things really come from inside of a person versus their external conditions that are making them feel that way? The answer is always that it's some combination of both, but people are really fighting it back and answer, like dealing with these kind of philosophy of psychiatry questions that I don't see that much in psychedelics yet, because I think they're really, people in this space are just advocating for their usefulness, which may still be the case depending on the origin of mental distress, but like being more critical even about what we're talking about psychedelics for X, whatever it is. I think that would be I think that would just lend itself to more nuance in talking about these things, not as cures, but as potential interventions for certain people in certain cases that may or may not work, which, as you said, is like a really unsexy way to describe them, but it is kind of the case. And that's still useful. Like, I think that's still good enough. I remember when the New England Journal of Medicine paper came out that compared psilocybin to an SSRI. And that was a complicated paper because it didn't achieve significance using one of the depression scales, which was like the one that they picked to use, but it did in a bunch of other measures and scales. But it was still about like half or something. People felt better afterwards on the SSRI and taking psilocybin for treatment resistant depression. And I remember thinking, like, people were like, oh, like 50%, like that's pretty, like people were kind of poo-pooing that result. And I think it was a Compass thing. So like their stock crashed or something like that. And I was like, that's amazing. Like 50% is so good. Like for a mental health treatment, for treatment resistant depression, like that is awesome. And I just feel like having like realistic expectations of what any one intervention can do for a general population of people is so important. You don't have to hype it up for it to be valuable or useful. I think, again, coming from the mental health world, where I'm like, that sounds really good to me. Actually, that sounds amazing. It's never going to be 100%.
Right. Yeah. I really appreciate you bringing this up. It makes me think about, honestly, how much bad science journalism there is. I also went to Columbia and got my master's. And when I was there, I learned how to read studies. And I learned to look at like how many people are in the study and how rigorous it is. What's the design? Is it a double-blind randomized clinical trial? Is it an observational study? It's really kind of a systemic problem we see in journalism, right? That journalists are being put on these sort of content hamster wheels where they have to write so quickly and slap headlines on things that are going to drive clicks to websites. And I mean, you were really fortunate that you were able to write. I can't even imagine how long these patent stories took you. I mean, I was reading through the one on Compass and I was like, oh my God, this must have taken her 6 months? I mean, it's crazy.
I mean, yeah, tragically, I still had to write about a story a week at Vice. So most of those were written in like a week, which is also part of the, the hamster wheel thing. We would have way better psychedelic journalism if people had more time to write articles and actually learn.
Way better journalism if people had more time.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's what I meant. Much better journalism if people had more time to work on stuff. When I wrote like a really long piece about a Nature Medicine paper that people were sort of critiquing the statistics in the paper, and I think it was like 3 days I was on the phone with statisticians like up till midnight, like trying to understand exactly what it was and making sure that I could communicate what people were fighting about. Because it's not that the study was still valuable, but like what they were claiming based on what the statistics that they did was like there was a gap between those two things. And that's really hard to understand, especially if the paper is in like Nature Medicine and it seems to have a good sample set. Like there's all these nuances in understanding just like the knowledge that we have about psychedelics that we're still working on. And of course, there's forms of knowledge that don't just come from scientific studies, but we should still strive to do the science and do it well, and also like understand it well, or communicate what the limitations of the kinds of knowledge are when we're writing about them.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, just, encouraging folks as always to raise an eyebrow or two when they see a headline that says something to the effect of study says or science says. It's like, does study say, or
exactly.
Is journalist on a really tight deadline?
Yeah, totally. And friendly reminder that journalists often don't write their headlines.
Right. Yes, that's true. That's true. So what, from all the research that you've read, what is your high level takeaway regarding the promise of psychedelics and also the ways in which we feel we need to be critical? What is the research saying and what is it not saying right now?
Yeah, I think for some people in very specific contexts, the measurement of their mental distress using specific scales changes after they take these drugs with psychotherapy. That's a lot of caveats. So that doesn't mean if you do shrooms in Joshua Tree with your friends that you're going to have the same outcome as someone that's doing synthetic psilocybin with preparation, navigation, and integration in a clinical context. Exactly. It will, but it will be different. Who's to say how, I don't know how it will be different for every person. Someone might have a better experience in the container of a clinical trial. Maybe you don't like that and you would have a better experience in Joshua Tree with your friends. It's just so individual. And so I think all we can really say is this is a thing that in these contexts makes some people report, again, the scale part is important. The way that we measure them matters. So their measurements on these scales that are being used in the trials are said to change in some way that seems to be beneficial. What that means when it is dispersed into the public as a treatment, we don't really know. There's a very well-known phenomenon that effect sizes go down once something becomes legal, FDA approved and actually uses medicine. Effect sizes are always higher within clinical trials, especially when they're being applied for FDA approval. And that's because everything is so tightly controlled. The groups are smaller. Once it's out in the world, it's just messier. And so it could be a reporting problem, but generally effect sizes always go down. I think we should be prepared for that. MDMA is going to be the first thing that someone can actually go and get a prescription for and use it for PTSD. I think one of the reasons that I've sort of lowered the frequency of writing about psychedelics in the past year is partly because I left Vice, but also because I just think that there's a lot that's going to need written about really soon. I still feel like we're kind of in a holding pattern. We really kind of need FDA approval to happen and for these things to actually go out into the world to really see what they're going to do. There's only so much that you can know from these research trials, which are so important. And I hope they keep going. And there's all these more interesting questions that we can ask about, the ways in which psychedelics work. What are the conditions? What are the variables that really change outcomes? The question of the importance of psychotherapy, I think, is one of the hugest ones that we still don't really have a handle on. What kind of therapy, how much, understanding how to help people through adverse events is going to be really important. Jules Evans is doing great work on that. But you just don't really know. And that's I think people want FDA approval to be this sort of stamp of certainty. And what it is actually is a stamp of safety. It's saying that up to a certain threshold, we believe that this is something that people with this kind of mental distress can go and maybe get help from, and it won't kill them immediately. We don't want drugs that do that. But how it's really going to play out, I don't know. We've never really had drugs that influence your psychology like this on the market before. So
right.
I think it's exciting, and it's also something that's it's big. It's big either way. It's going to be a big deal for those who have access to it, or it'll be too expensive and nobody will take it and everything will just stay exactly the same.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider here. And I think the general takeaway for me and hopefully for our listeners too is, yes, psychedelics have shown promise, and also read the fine print or listen to this podcast. We'll be back in a moment. This episode is brought to you by Psyched Wellness. Psyched Wellness is on a mission to bring people the healing magic of Amanita muscaria mushrooms with their product Calm. If you haven't heard, there has been a growing number of folks who are exploring the prospect of Amanita muscaria extracts in small doses for anxiety. And Amanita muscaria is not a scheduled substance in the United States, unlike psilocybin. So it's something that more and more people are exploring, getting interested in, and it's something that Psyched Wellness is devoted to. There's some things about Calm specifically that are unique and worth noting. So firstly, it's a natural made supplement made with handpicked Amanita muscaria mushrooms. I'm going to say that's important because there are a lot of supplements where you don't know where they're getting their ingredients. You don't know where they're getting their sources. And so it's really important when you're embarking on a journey of taking a new tincture, taking a new supplement, that you really know that you are purchasing a product that is made with care, made with intention. You know where they're getting their ingredients. Some of the benefits are that this Amanita muscaria extract may promote better sleep and may help you wake up feeling more rested without feeling groggy. It also may provide physical and mental stress support, which is something I know a lot of us are needing at this particular moment. So if you're curious about adding some Calm to your life, you can check them out at psyched-wellness.com and use code DOUBLEBLIND for 10% off at checkout. So now we're going to get to everyone's favorite part of the show, trip tips. As a reminder for everyone who's listening, sorry if you've heard me say this before, but we are journalists. We're not doctors. We're not psychiatrists. We're not scientists. So we're going to sort of riff on some of your questions about tripping, but yeah, take it with a grain of salt, so to speak. So Shayla, I'm going to punt to you. You want to pull a question from our community?
Sure. Okay, here's the question. I've heard that Oregon and Colorado have legalized psychedelics. What's the deal? Can I go there and do mushrooms legally now? Great question. Everyone's very confused about lots of people are very confused about this. I would love to talk about Oregon specifically, which I know more about because I have been following and was reporting as they were developing the rules for legalized mushroom use there. And something big just happened in Oregon, which I think is a really good example of how psychedelics can't solve all of our problems. Which is that Measure 110 was recently repealed. So a little backstory, and then this will answer the question about legal use in Oregon. Measure 109 and 110 were passed at the same time, and Measure 109 allowed for psilocybin service centers to be created. So these are places that have to apply to get a license to give psilocybin to people who come and pay to take them there. You have to have this license and a licensed person to take mushrooms with, basically. That person does not have to be a therapist. It can be anyone who kind of follows the guidelines and rules set by the Oregon Health Authority and the Psilocybin Advisory Board. That was a long, complicated process. I listened to many hours of those meetings as they tried to come up with the rules. And so now you can go to Oregon and go to a service center and take psilocybin there at the service center if you want to.
If you can afford it and also get off of the wait list.
Yes. So there are problems to how this has actually ended up happening, which is that a lot of the service centers are incredibly expensive, and this is not that special. Many of them resemble other kinds of legal retreats in other parts of the world, which cost up to thousands of dollars for a few days and like one or two dosing sessions. Some of them look like really beautiful experiences. They're kind of like spa-like places. They're very pretty. You get like all your food included. Maybe sometimes you do other kind of, like intentional or like meditative practices. Maybe there's like a sound bath or like breath work or something like that. But they're expensive. They're super expensive. And I read an article recently that most of the people who are coming to these service centers are not people from Oregon. They're actually coming from out of town. It's definitely kind of a psychedelic tourism sort of thing, which was, a concern when this was all being developed, that it would just be inaccessible and be very expensive. And I think even more troubling is that Jules Evans in his Substack recently wrote about some complaints that have been filed to the Oregon Health Authority about what's going on at some of these service centers. And there are instances where people who don't really have any experience working with people with mental health issues are like doing some like questionable, like woo-woo type stuff, and people feel like they're not getting the support that they need, or they're taking mushrooms and like getting sort of scared or overwhelmed, not being followed up with. There was one person who complained that someone kept playing like jam band music and like wouldn't turn it down, and the music was really loud, and they were one person got outright scammed. So it's like, that's, you know, that's happening at the same time. Measure 110 decriminalized all drugs in Oregon. And the idea was that they were going to have this really, really, progressive drug policy to help with some of the issues that they've been having there. So they decriminalized all drugs, and they didn't really match it with the social services that people might need who are struggling with substance abuse issue. And so the result is that people really pushed back because the drug problems just started getting really, really terrible in Oregon, downtown Portland specifically. The fentanyl addiction problem there is really massive, and it's really hard, and it's sad and scary. And it caused enough of a public outcry that they repealed Measure 110, and now drugs are recriminalized in Oregon. At the same time, the service centers are still fine though. So you had this public health problem of both substance abuse and the criminalization of drugs. The thing that actually was like trying to address that is done. It's repealed. Like, we're back to criminalizing drugs. Meanwhile, the $3,000 bougie mushroom retreat center, that's still fine. You can still go to that. And I think there's something really important there in that dichotomy of like actually trying to resolve some like really complicated public health issues versus the sort of spa like wellness thing that's happening with Measure 109, and that remains untouched. So the answer is yes, you can go to Oregon and still do that if you can afford it. But more generally, I think we have to think about what kind of drug policy or like health intervention through psychedelics is actually going to be impactful and accessible for most people. I think Oregon had a lot of hopes pinned to it, and the reality has been disappointing.
Right. Yeah. And I'll just speak quickly to Colorado and say that Coloradans passed the Natural Medicine Health Act, which is opening similar centers to the centers in Oregon, but they're just in the process of, they're going through this rulemaking process like they did in Oregon to figure out exactly, what's going to be required in order to open a center, in order to become a licensed facilitator, all of the rest. One of the things that's unique about the Colorado Natural Medicine Health Act is that in the beginning, the service centers are only going to be serving psilocybin, but then the bill also opens the possibility for other psychedelics. I want to say it's non-peyote derived mescaline, maybe iboga. I can't remember. Don't quote me on it, but there's a couple other psychedelics that can be served in these centers a few years following the opening of the psilocybin service centers. And there is a decriminalization aspect to the Natural Medicine Health Act, although some people think it didn't go far enough. This is all really, really important to be talking about because, again, going back to journalists and the hamster wheel and the headlines, you might see, Oregon has legalized mushrooms, or Oregon has legalized mushroom therapy. And it's like, well, sort of. Like, yes, anyone can technically go to Oregon now who's over the age of 18 and, try to have a session at one of these centers. One of the things that makes it unique from the FDA is that you don't need a diagnosis. Anyone gets sort of qualified to do it, assuming that, the center thinks that you're safe to do it. But that doesn't mean, it doesn't mean accessibility. It's just expensive, and there are wait lists. And also some people might just want to do shrooms in their house. And is that okay? Not according to the law.
Not according to the law. Yeah, it's really, and I think another thing in Colorado maybe you know the answer to this, I can't remember. Something that happened in Oregon is that a bunch of counties opted out of Measure 109, which meant that they voted to not allow psilocybin service centers in their county. And that was kind of complicated. And I think Colorado decided to not allow for an opt-out.
I'd have to check on. No, I don't know about that.
I think it was up for discussion, and I don't remember where it landed. But I think that that's really important too, because when you think about counties coming together to opt out, I'd be curious more, like, is this a psilocybin PR issue? Like what is the reason that they're opting out? I think there's some, we in the psychedelics world, we can sometimes forget that we are in a bubble, and actually thinking about psychedelics as a mental health intervention is not just, the accessibility part doesn't just come from money. It comes from like the idea that this thing could be helpful. And that idea, there's still kind of a gap between a lot of people really thinking that. They have outdated ideas about psychedelics, or they feel really worried about them or wary about them. And it's another reason to cut down on the hype. It's like, if you're actually wanting to talk to someone and meeting them where they are about this use as a novel drug intervention, just promising that it's going to do amazing things and like opening up a service center in people's counties where they're like, wait a minute, like mushrooms for mental health, like what are you talking about? Like, it's just, I think that, again, Oregon provided a lot of examples of people missing each other in terms of what they really want, their education level, what like the needs that they really have in their community, how they feel about drugs more generally in terms of broader decrim, psychedelics position within that. And so it's just, it's going to be, it'll be interesting to see how Colorado does and to compare the two, and also to keep an eye on Oregon throughout the rest of the year. Now that Measure 110 is repealed, but 109 is going to keep trucking along.
Yeah. I mean, I would be so interested as a reporter. We don't get the luxury often of being in the field anymore. The good old days when we used to actually put our feet on the ground. Now it's a lot of reporting on the phone, but I would be so interested to just take a road trip through Oregon and Colorado and talk to folks in different counties and cities, because I would imagine that there is a concentration of psychedelic advocates within cities, right? Like there are certain especially in Oregon, obviously, there's a lot of psychonauts in Portland, but there's also cities like Bend that are known for having like a concentration of people that want to see psychedelic reform. But like, what's going on in the rest of the state?
Exactly. Yeah. So again, to answer the question, sort of, and it's complicated. It's like always the answer, sadly, for everything people want, like sort of.
Yeah, that's the answer. Sort of, kind of. So folks, if you want the chance for us to answer your questions on the Double Blind Magic Hour, then you can email them to us at magichour@doubleblindmag.com. So before we wrap up, Shayla, we always like to invite our guests, or I guess in this case, our correspondent, to do a couple minutes of meditation with us and just sort of digest the conversation. Is that something that you're up for?
Yeah, sounds great.
Hello, I'm Sky Weaver, resident facilitator at Double Blind, and I invite you to perhaps soften your eyes, wiggle your body and your spine just a little bit until you come to a gentle, dynamic stillness. And perhaps noticing the breath as it comes into the body. Feeling your feet or your seat beneath you. And perhaps taking one deep breath here. And letting out a little bit of sound. Feeling free to wiggle that spine a little bit more. Softening the shoulders. And taking a moment here simply to be. That's it, right there. And taking a deep breath in, beginning to call yourself back into your body. Perhaps bringing a smile to your face and gently allowing your eyes to open. Welcome back.
You know, if we're going to talk about data around the promise of particular mental health treatments, I think there's very few people in this world across the spectrum of ideological perspectives on mental health that would say, don't meditate.
Well, that's also complicated. Willoughby Brown. Yeah, Willoughby, no, her last name's not Brown. I'm blank. She works at Brown, or she used to. She has this whole adverse events of meditation study that's been ongoing for a really long time, which is very important. It's called
we'll
called
have to
Cheetah
have you
House.
back on to talk about that.
Yeah. It's it's kind of it can be distressing, but then also maybe sort of nice too. Like almost nothing is universal. We're all really different. So nothing can be the same for every single person.
I want to invite you to share your social handles, etc., where folks can find you. But first, is there anything else? Hopefully we'll have you back on, but is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners just coming out of this conversation?
I guess I do want to share that I think it's possible to have a critical eye and to ask questions and to have a nuanced, like, pluralist perspective on things and still be hopeful and excited and maybe like curious above all, and like find joy in that curiosity. Psychedelics are eternally interesting. It's why I keep writing about them. And just because they don't do something that's like very clean or universal doesn't mean they're not worthy of investigation on so many levels, be it personal, academic, or examining them through other things than just science. Me and Oshan Jarrow from Vice have started a psychedelic humanities salon series in New York. If you're a listener and you're interested in that, and that's about talking about conversations about psychedelics, not just in a scientific lens, but through anthropology, history, literature, sociology. So I just think that it's possible to have those two things together. And I think it'll make it a more accessible topic for everyone, whether they want it as medicine or something else.
And where do people find you?
Yeah, so right now I am freelancing for several places. Two of them are The Guardian and Psyche, which is the psychological focus website of Aeon, which is a philosophy publication. And I am on Twitter. I also will not call it X, but I am on Twitter. And that's where I post basically all of my work and also any events that I'm doing that are coming up.
Thank you so much for joining, Shayla.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Folks, if you want the chance for us to answer your questions on air about tripping, I want to remind you that you can email them to magichour@doubleblindmag.com. You can also check out the podcast's website, doubleblindmag.com/magichour, for episodes, links to articles that we reference, and lots of other fun things. We'd love to hear your suggestions about who should come on, or your thoughts about what we talked about today. There are so many different ways to hit us up. We're also at Double Blind Mag on all channels: TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, you name it. I want to give a shout out to the amazing folks at Human Content who are producing this podcast and helping make it possible. They do a lot of great podcasts other than this one. So if you are an audiophile, you can check them out on Instagram and TikTok at Human Content Pods. We want to say thanks to all of the great listeners for leaving wonderful feedback and awesome reviews. If you subscribe and comment on your favorite podcasting app or on YouTube, we might give you a shout out on the podcast. The full video episodes are up every week on YouTube at Double Blind. Thanks again for listening. I'm your host, Shelby Hartman. Special thanks to our correspondent and journalist, Shayla Love. Our executive producers are Aaron Corney, Rob Goldman, and Shanti Brooke, and Alex Field from the Double Blind team, who also edits the show. Our engineer is Jason Portizo. Our music is by Oma. To learn about the Double Blind Magic Hour program, disclaimer, and ethics policy, and submission, verification, and licensing terms, you can go to doubleblindmag.com/magic-hour or reach out to us at magichour@doubleblindmag.com. The Double Blind Magic Hour is a Human Content and Double Blind production. Now, let's take you out on Guacamayo by Danit.
Te agradezco por entregar tu amistad. Agradeciendo por esta hermosa claridad, por la confianza y en la luz. Pinta, pinta, pinta con el movimiento de tus plumas sale una vibración que me abraza eternamente, que me enseña eternamente. Pinta, pinta, pinta con el movimiento de tus plumas sale una vibración que me abraza eternamente, que me enseña eternamente.
Thanks for watching. And if you're thinking, gosh, I really need more Double Blind Magic Hour in my life, well, you can start listening now by clicking on that playlist button right over there. New episodes are out every Monday, so please subscribe and join us each week on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.